Federal government last week announced that it will give each state of the federation a sum of 5 billion naira as palliatives to cushion the impact of the removal of payment of subsidy on petrol. But the announcement has elicited different reactions from Nigerians, with many asking if this is even a wise decision. For instance, the Niger State Governor Mohammed Bago has warned that the federal government's palliative cannot address the hardship imposed on Nigerians by the removal of petrol subsidy, advising the government to seek alternative means of tackling the current economic hardship of the country is currently going through, saying the subsidy palliative is not sustainable.
Meanwhile, the National Association of Persons with Physical Disabilities, NAPWPD, has demanded a 5% share of the 5 billion palliative approved by the federal government for states and local government councils. To discuss this further, we're joined by Kach Ononuju. He's a public affairs analyst and the Director General, the Heritage Center, Abuja. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Ononuju.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right. So let's get into the conversation. The palliative. We're having these conversations now. Some would say that these were conversations that ought to have been had before the policy of fuel subsidy removal. And as such, what we're doing is putting the cart before the horse. I'd like your thoughts on this. Do you think that at this point, the 5 billion palliative would make any reasonable, notable difference in sort of reducing the hardship that Nigerians are currently facing?
No, it simply goes to show you that the government was not prepared. And that begins to make a lot of us wonder if Bola Tinubu, despite the energy he spent on his campaigns, was actually prepared to rule. I believe the answer is no, he was never prepared. And even the issue of palliative, it wasn't his policy, it was forced upon him. And the issue about removal of subsidy, it also wasn't his policy, it was forced upon him. I don't think anything has happened to actually show us that Mr. Tinubu was prepared for governance on this scale, or even thought through the circumstances that will arise from his party's intention to tie policies to the instructions given by those who were now giving the money. And that is, if you're going to continue to come to me to beg money, I insist you remove subsidy as part of your government program. It's a desirable thing to do, to remove subsidy. But like we knew when Mr. Tinubu went on the road campaigning against President Goodluck Jonathan's removal of subsidy, he saw then President Goodluck Jonathan rolled out palliatives premised around bus. The provision of transportation is a strategic national security item. And I do not believe the APC people do recognize that transportation is a strategic national security interest in any country. And I believe they're not approaching it in the right way. Where are the conversations with the vehicle manufacturers? Where are the words from producers like Innocent, who will now tell us how he'll be able to put how much amount of buses he will put on which roads, and those buses that will be able to carry workers from point A to point B. These are the things that you have to look at, so that as the buses are rolled out, the buses are also rolled out with local labor, and as local labor is embraced, so would we see an investment in the economy. But I don't think we've seen this. So I think we are jumping from one mistake to the other, and which gives the full impression that Mr. Tinubu and his party are not prepared for governance, no matter what their argument of trying to seize. You can also see in your stories about Niger, they are still not very prepared about this. So is it a matter of trying to gain validation from friends and Europeans, or about governance and being responsible to the intentions and the needs of the Sahel and the West African sub-region that you come from? No, and that's the problem. And it's been said before, nobody steals power with intentions to do good for the general good. So we are now suffering from the arguments about the illegitimacy of the government And we are beginning to see that true, Nigerians were right not to have voted for the APC, because as you can see, they are not ready to govern. It is from one mistake to the other. And I believe these things are just not sustainable. And that's why Nigerians said, we do not want you. And that's why they did not vote for the APC. So I don't understand how they're going to get it right. No, they cannot. We're managing. We are suffering. You can see because of the wrong policies, there is massive hardship across our country. Because of the disconnect in trying to actually govern properly, we have issues everywhere, and there's instability in our country. Yes, you heard me. There is instability in Nigeria, and that arose from the bombastic instrumentation of the civilian coup.
All right, Mr. Nonju, that's also moving to other aspects of the conversation, because I'm certain a lot of people would agree with you that this may not solve any of the problems. Rice is no matter how many bags of rice you give a person, it's not going to pay for their transportation fees. It's not going to it's not going to help with the increased cost of living generally, increased school fees, increased rent, increased transportation. Rice and tomatoes would not solve that problem. So I'm not sure what exactly how the government is thinking about this. But I also want to ask about because I think it's in the news that I think it's the Niger State governor also who is complaining bitterly about the palliatives and saying it's not enough, it's not adequate, and all of that. Does this also show how much the states themselves have failed? If they also cannot provide palliatives for their own citizens. Because each state is meant to be, to some extent, independent enough to at least be able to create a reasonably better living standards for its citizens. These states have internally generated revenue. They also receive money from the federation account every month. Annually, this runs into hundreds of billions of naira. And so, how does it? What responsibility do you think the states themselves should be able to take at a time like this, instead of just waiting for handouts from the federal government?
Well, you're talking about Niger State. Niger State is a special case. Niger State is one of the states that are so negatively impacted due to insecurity. So the governor knows what he's saying. The idea of giving governors 5 billion, if you share 5 billion as per the amount of citizens in those states, 5 billion will not solve anything. So I think it's probably just the strategy of trying to bribe governors and thinking the 5 billion bribing of governors will get the governors not to talk, because that 5 billion will not get to the people. You can take that to the bank. If you want to divide it, how much each individual will get, nobody will get up to 1,000 naira. So that's just nothing. Please, that simply tells you that what we are having is a government bumbling from one policy to the other, simply because, as I said earlier, Mr. Tinubu was never ever ready to rule. And that, I see this holistically, we have a real national challenge. And as far as I'm concerned, the earlier we come together as a people of one country to face this challenge, the better, because the crisis arising from this economic challenge, it's big. It's so big, it's so worrisome. Now you're seeing we're moving towards stagflation. We have inflation that the government don't know how to correct. And as far as I'm concerned, the more the change in the exchange rate affects the cost of petroleum products, the more you will see that the government will understand to themselves that they are not ready to actually face the consequences of the removal of subsidy, or whatever that you call it. Because Tinubu is also not even asking questions as to what happened to the money that's been removed. If you're not asking questions about what happened to the money that's been removed, and you're not even willing to get those who took the money, to bring them back, or to get to some kind of resolution with them, I don't see you going anywhere. Because he cannot do that, because he's weak due to the way that he was brought into power. So I really see this holistically as greater than the palliative, small bandage measures. Those things would not cure this very deep wound that we now suffer. No matter how much Indomie you want to give families, look at the cost of transportation. Most people that are driving a 4-cylinder car do not have the money to be able to fuel those cars through 5 days without exhausting their take-home salary. Why don't we start looking at things like the Dodge? Why don't we remember when we had these problems immediately after the Civil War? One way the army thought about doing that, 100% or 200% or 300% increase in the take-home pay, let people have more disposable income so that they'll be able to compete and be able to grapple with the new challenges of being a Nigerian and living in the Nigerian space. It is very difficult for poor people. It's even difficult for middle-class families because the cost of petrol takes everything that you put in the car that takes the money away. Because for him to bring food to the family, he has to go from point A to point B. And the cost of transporting him from point A to point B is very expensive when he funds it himself. That's why I believe the government has to look at public transportation as a strategic national security issue.
Mr. Onadoju, if you, as you've described, it's a really dire situation. It's a really uncomfortable situation for the average Nigerian. Now it gets worse for persons living with disabilities who have been worse hit by the removal of fuel subsidy and the resultant increase in cost of living. Now the persons living with disabilities have asked for 5% of this 5 billion that has been approved for palliatives. They have. Would you say that this is a fair consideration? Do you think that this will even happen? And talking about inclusion, do you think that this administration will be very big on making provisions for people living with disabilities? Because a number of the things they are asking for are not favors or charity. They are things that are provided, that should be provided for, the way that they live their lives, even according to the law, in terms of transportation, the ability to move around. We don't have a number of that. A number of structures don't even make provision for persons living with disabilities. So do you think that this administration will do well in catering to those living with disabilities and especially looking immediately at the palliatives that have been approved?
This administration will not do well. This administration will suffer from instability because the administration is illegitimate. Every time you announce the results of a presidential election, like we had in 1993, what follows is instability. Mr. Tinubu was saying, inaugurate me, I will stabilize. It's not true. Once you have instability, you don't have trust. Because the most important ingredient you need in governance is trust. And right now, when they don't trust him, there is nothing he does that is welcome. And he is not even adding anything that are thought through. What is it that is thought through? In trying to arrest the transport crisis, what has he done to help the private sector to increase the workability and the employment of those who are on the streets? Don't forget, Nigeria is the country with the highest number of unemployment in the whole world. Don't forget that. At 35.6%, we sit at the very top. So what you're actually seeing is a country that has economically failed. What we still have is hope that's holding us together. But we have security-wise failed. We've also failed as a state economically. And this is as a consequence of the state capture policies of the APC. Let's not pretend as if we're going to, postpone this till tomorrow. It's not going to work. And look at Tinubu now wanting, simply because of illegitimate ways of coming to power, gaining validation from the West, he wants to start a civil war with the Hausas. Hausas are a big chunk of Nigeria's population. Hausas make up 54% of the population of Niger Republic. And the Hausas are now fighting against French neocolonialism, and Tinubu is saying he wants to fight Hausas. I don't understand. I don't understand. This government does not have policies that are properly thought through. You want to start a proxy war within the Sahel. Do you understand what you're saying? Who are you going to send to the war front? Asari Dokubo? Who? I don't understand this government. So I believe we have a national emergency. It's either we call all Nigerian people, stakeholders, critical ones to the table, or, as the youths are saying, we put all eyes on the judiciary. Nigeria is on the brink. Let nobody play with us. You see, you cannot pretend about it. When we did this problem, we had this problem in 1993, after the annulment of Ebola's election. The country remained unstable until we brought Obasanjo out of prison and Nigeria started to heal. It has now repeated itself. You cannot repeat same processes in same society and expect a different outcome. Nigeria currently is unstable, and Tinubu's policy of seeking validation from the West is about to plunge the entire Sahel into more instability.
Well, hopefully, you know, it doesn't get to
with catastrophe.
Yeah, hopefully it doesn't get to that, and you know, negotiations with ECOWAS and the Niger, of course, the junta, you know, are peaceful and they're able to find some middle ground. And also, you know, to Nigerians who have to, of course, you know, manage the country as it currently is and deal with the palliatives. We hope that, of course, you know, there are answers to, you know, your prayers at some point. But Mr. Onoju, it's always interesting hearing you speak and hearing your perspectives. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. We'll be bringing you in very soon.
Thank you very much for having me.